Hey, good evening, everyone. How are you guys doing? Welcome to another episode of Startup Story. We're just waiting for Ashutosh to join us, and it's nice to see. Hi, Venkat. How are you doing, man? And hi, Akhil. So, for those of you who are yes, Ashutosh,
Hello, sir.
sir. Good evening.
Somehow the
So the yeah,
internet was
all the risk
broke
of
up.
slow internet.
Risk of slow internet. That's also a risk.
Yes. That's also a risk, isn't it? So anyway, great.
Yes.
Hey, thank you, Ashutosh, for coming in. We can just kickstart right now. So a very good evening to everyone. This is Vijetha here from Bangalore. A wonderful session from a wonderful rock star, Ashutosh. Thank you so much for I must always say this. You taking so much of time, effort to prepare these beautiful knowledge sessions for all of us. Thank you so much for that. And today is a very interesting session, risk mitigation from multiple angles. But first, of course, what has been the journey in terms of the previous sessions, some very interesting stuff that has happened, and what do we have in store for us today, Ashutosh?
Thank you, Vijetha, for conducting this as always, and thank you, Jagat, with phone, for hosting this platform. Whatever we have covered so far is from a startup story perspective. We covered my story. We covered how the teams are set up, how you know we can manage marketing, sales. We also talked about a little bit on the investment perspective, how the investment and equity share is done. So we have covered all the basics of the startups. A couple of weeks back, we geared into the next round, of our discussions where we are taking the next steps, and towards that end, we did one technical session on blockchain last week, and now we are here to talk about the risks. As usual, I'll be doing a presentation. So we'll be taking it in two parts. One, I'll talk from a perspective of me as a founder, and these are mostly my own personal views, right? So obviously, risk is something that we all have to think, but uh, I just wanted to put like a spin on what the risks are and then try to cover as much as possible, taking the examples that we have taken in the past, and then we'll do it that way. And so the other view of looking at it is from an investor's perspective. So how the investors view the risk. So because I've worn that hat, I've invested in companies. So I'll talk about that, like what are the risks that I look at when I'm talking to the companies. So without further ado, I'll just start. Hope you can see my screen. All right. Okay. So when we are talking about an entrepreneur's view, right? The first thing that we have to do when we start the company is identify what are the different areas of risk, right? Um, these could be, I mean, the first and foremost is the idea risk, right? Whether the idea is at risk, whether this idea has any potential in the market, right? I mean, something that works in the Indian market might not work in the Australian market, or might not.
I think something happened, Ashutosh. Is it frozen? So I think we can wait till Ashutosh comes back. But he's given a very beautiful insight about the risk matrix. So I think this is what happens. The risk of slow internet in our society, in our ecosystem and community. So just to quickly talk about what Ashutosh has been doing for the last few episodes as well. He's been talking about the legal angles, the funding angles, and giving a lot of insights that are helping the founders. So today as well, what Ashutosh has prepared is going to be about the different kinds of risk, how to mitigate the risk from the founder's perspective, and yeah, you're back, Ashutosh. You're back. Ashutosh, can you hear us? You're back. Continue.
Okay.
Present your screen. You can present your screen.
I still cannot see.
Okay, so while he comes back, yeah, Ashutosh, you're back.
Yes,
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
the risk is.
Yeah, the risk continues. Don't worry. So I said some good things about you when you were not
Okay,
there.
all right. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can see your screen.
Okay, all right. So we talk about when we're talking about a product risk, right? So product is not just from the perspective of what the market requires right now, but it's also something that can take into adverse conditions. For instance, a lot of companies suffered when COVID happened, or a lot of companies suffered when demonetization happened, right? How does the product evolve in time in those times? So that's also covered in product risk. Then there's the customer risk. This is potentially the top three risks that are there in the market, because when you're talking about B2C or when you're talking about B2B, the customer's temperament matters a lot. In terms of B2C, it's always about the volume. You might get 50,000 customers in the first month, and then if they don't see the product evolving, if they don't see the product changing with time, or if there's a competitive risk that comes in and then there's another competitor, the customers will go away. In B2B, that risk is not there because there's still this element of tie up and maybe 3 month or a 5 month or a 6 months chain that is going on with the customer. But over there, the risk is maintaining the quality, maintaining the same standards that have been maintained for giving the customer the right uh, product, right? And then providing all the services. One of the things that we as startup founders don't think about when we go to B2B is uh, once we have delivered the product, right? There's an annual maintenance because even though we are startups, we are in the agile development. We talk about building quickly and then producing results quickly. The corporates don't work like that. The businesses don't work like that. They work on cycles where we can provide them AMCs, we can provide them other things. Even though if we are doing SaaS products, they still would like to see an option where we are maintaining and supporting them for a year or so, right? So things like that, that comes as part of the customer risk. One thing again that the second most important that we don't talk about is the legal and compliance risk. Whenever we are building a product, it should not happen that someday somebody is suing us, right? Or if we have built something, the core of that is taken over, and then somebody else starts to take that core and talks about that core, and then suddenly we have lost that core, right? So understanding the legal and compliance risk, a lot of startups don't do that, and it should be there on day one. And I know, very recently we circulated that an article where one of the founders, he didn't have an HR for 10 years or whenever that he was running the company, right? But I'm sure that even in that case, they had taken care of every legal and compliance that is there, right? So having that into picture is very important. Team risk, of course, people leaving, people joining in, that's one part of it. Founders having problems, founders discussing, so that's another problem. So we talked about that in remediating and amicably solving problems between founders. Then there's a competitive risk. Of course, we are always at a risk where everyone sees that we are doing something different, and
I think Akhil, if you can just warn Ashutosh that he's stuck, then he can come back. So, ladies and gentlemen, today seems to be the day of internet risk. Okay, but I think what one of the things that Ashutosh is very clearly saying is that the risk that is there, unless you really understand it and you prevent yourselves from going, beyond what your capacity for risk is something that founders must be careful about. And I'm also reading out one of the comments from Venkat that going too far before knowing the quantum of the opportunity and ending up a lifestyle business to be decided to start to mitigate emotional risk around the idea. Okay, now that's a little bit deep, isn't it? Yes, psychologically and emotionally, there are a lot of risks for founders, and they have to be very, very careful about it. And yes, we have gone through a situation in the last 12 months because of the pandemic. A lot of folks have slowed down, but that is life, isn't it, guys? You have taken the opportunity to do something innovative and disruptive. And yes, from the type Bangalore and from my side, like what else can we do to support the ecosystem and community? That's what we focus on. And I mean, all these sessions will be helpful for that. Ashutosh, you're back.
Sorry for this.
No,
For some
no, you can do one thing, Ashutosh. When
internet
you're
is
presenting, maybe you
not
can stay off
good.
video. Do you want to stay off video when you're presenting? Does that help?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, do that, do that. No problem.
Is
Yeah.
it better now?
You can share your screen now, Ashutosh. Your screen is not visible yet.
Okay. Yeah, I'll share my screen. Okay.
Yeah, you can start
All
presenting.
right. Can you see my screen?
It needs to come on, Ashutosh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, if you want, you can just send the
The
presentation to me or Akhil. So maybe we can present it. Ashutosh, it's not clear. Do you want to just send a presentation to either Akhil or me?
uh,
So it's easier. So it's easier for us to handle this. Your audio is clear. Sorry, folks. Today's challenge of technology. Yeah, you're visible. We can hear you. You can talk.
all right, perfect. Okay. So I don't know what is happening today. I'm so sorry to
No, no,
everyone.
don't worry. These are good.
Yeah.
Just share your screen. Yeah, perfect. Just go full
Yes.
screen,
Yes.
and then you can go
Yes.
offline. Maybe you can. Yeah, perfect, perfect.
Okay. All right. So finally we have the financial risk. I mean the top three, it completes the top three, right? So financial risk is how much runway do we have? I mean, is the investor ready to invest? Are we able to run this company bootstrap? So these are the questions that we have to ask, when we're talking about like financial risk. Um, so what I usually do is, as an entrepreneur, when we started our journey, we created like a risk matrix, and how that looks like, it looks something similar to this. So we have two axes. So we talk about like, when we're talking about a risk, we talk about the probability of its occurrence. Like what is the, the probability that this risk will occur, the probability that this risk won't occur, right? So that's one part, which is our x-axis. And on the y-axis, we have the severity, like how severe is that, right? So and then based on that, you have like four quadrants. So the first quadrant is basically risks that can be ignored. So they have low impact, there's a lesser probability. These are the risks, like, when we're starting out, looking for a place, and things like that, right? So things that we think that we can control, right? So we put that into the low risk category, right? And this understanding of how do we communicate, and then how do we talk about what is a low risk, what is a high risk, is what comes here, right? Then the second one is the risks that are there but can be mitigated. These are things like, an employee leaving, and then maybe power cut, network cut, right? Things like this, right? So these are risks but these can be mitigated. These can be solved with some ways or the other ways, right? So they have an impact and they have a higher probability, right? But that impact is very low, right? And these things happen quite a bit, right? There will be employees which will leave. There will be times when you are not able to pay the salary on 5th. You'll pay the salary on 7th, but you'll still be able to pay the salary. So these are those kind of risks, right? Um, One of the high impact risks, but which doesn't occur that much, is risks that cannot be mitigated without insurance. And these insurance can be, like let's say, some disaster occurs, right? So you need some kind of insurance to do that, to mitigate that risk. Or for instance, you're in a financial crunch and you need an insurance or somebody backing you up to get that, right? Again, lesser probability, but this isn't high impact because it involves a third party. We are talking about another person coming in who is helping us out, whether it's an insurance company, whether it's another financer, or maybe another family friend who's putting in the money. So there is a third person. So there is this always that risk that how much will they be able to provide and how much will they give, right? So that's the part. And the one which is most critical is the risks that we have to actively look for, the ones that we have to actively monitor. These are the ones that have higher probability and then they have the higher impact, right? And we'll come into that, right? So uh, but the point is, why is this important is something that I want to explain in the next slide, right? So let's say we are, in a state where we have done everything. We have done our market study. We have done a lot of research. We have customers. We have everything, right? So then, on the basis of that, we make our risk sheet, right? We have and risk is usually a probability number. So we're talking about, like, how big is this risk, right? So now we are saying that we are in a good shape. The startup thinks that we are in a good shape. We have, like, 90% chance that it's a good product, everyone needs it, it's a genuine need in the market, right? There's an addressable market. There's the implementation is done right, the team is right, we are able to do profit margins, right? We are able to beat the competition, all the compliances are met, nobody is going to sue us, and we have, gone back from the red tapeism and everything, right? Everything looks good, right? But none of this is 100%, and that's the problem, right? So when we are talking about, when we are talking about risk, right? So it's very hard to put something at 100%. It's very hard to say that we are 100% confident that we have done this, right? And but what we want to do is we want to get very close to the fact that, we are at 100% confidence. But if everything is at a 90% in this figure, right? So if you statistically imagine that all of these are independent events, right? And if you do the math, right, then if you have a probability of surviving all the 10 risks, let's say, the 10% of all of these happen at one shot, right? Then the probability of surviving that is only 35%. Which means that even though, when we started this philosophy, when we wrote down everything that was there in our hand, we said that, we are in great shape from everything of these perspectives. There's only 10% chance that anything will go wrong. But if all of those 10 things goes wrong, and it will happen, imagine COVID, right? So when COVID hit, most of the companies got all of these 10 things wrong, right? And then the probability of survival becomes 35%. So then you have a problem because, suddenly from a great product, great achievement, we are at a 35% risk. So that's why when we are talking about risk, right, we cannot be complacent. We cannot be in a place where we think that because we have all these metrics in place, we have everything in place, things will work out. Because it takes just a second, just a snap, just one COVID to go from like 90% to 35%. So now we have talked about risk, right? And then now the second part to it is, how do we mitigate those risks? And the most important thing when we're talking about mitigating risk is, uh, ask yourself questions. Don't doubt yourself, but ask yourself questions. Questions around I mean, if we are going back here, right? So we are sure that 90% chance that there's a market need. How can that 90% be 98%? That 98% is if you keep asking yourself the questions, you keep going to customers, talk to the customers, take the customer feedback, look at the feedback and see if you can provide a better experience, get that customer to be on board, not for 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, but for a year. The moment you get a customer for a year, then this 90% suddenly becomes 98% because there's one person who's there for you for a year. And then if one person is there for a year and then they give like a good testimonial, you can approach other people, right? So keep asking yourself these questions. Keep uh, keep going to people for the feedback. Get your validations, right? Talk to people. Understand what works, what doesn't work. Um, if you think of the app stores, whether it's the Google App Store or the Apple App Store, they both came with uh, the star rating and everything. But if you ever go through your app store history, there are very few apps where the developers respond. The developers take the feedback and then they listen, then they respond. And in most of the cases, I can guarantee you that in 99% of the cases, wherever the developers respond, the customers always say, good developer, good response, always there to help. And that's a big thing because that gets that customer to be there on the platform. That makes that customer not leave that platform. And that those validations are very important. That's how you lower your risk because you're understanding what the customer wants, you're getting things done. The third one, which is very important, and people don't do that in India, and I don't know why, is always target for paid POCs. Right? If a customer is not ready to pay you now, uh, there is no chance that they'll pay you in the future. Right? And the way POCs work, especially when we are talking about B2Bs, um, POCs are never 1 month, 2 month. POCs run for 6 months. That means you have a customer who's using your product for 6 months without paying any dime, right? And and that's a huge risk, right? You're tying up resources. I mean, if you think of in a very simple case, very simple mathematical case, if you're paying someone, let's say 50,000 rupees per month, that boils down to, and which is for let's say 20 work days, so that boils down to like 250, 2500 per day, right? So when you're talking about 2500 per day and then you multiply that by 6 months, so that's the amount of money you have wasted. You put some resource here, who's doing a POC, and then they're supporting the POC and nothing is coming out. So always go for paid POC. At least if you're doing three POCs, one of them should be paid, so that you get that validation that there is a paying customer. And we've talked about this several times, and I'd reiterate it again that the first person who pays your product for your product is your customer, and then you should always be with that customer. And towards that end, the other thing that is important is to always innovate. This is helpful in two ways. This is helpful in giving customers the best experience. Innovation is not always in terms of technology. This is a very wrong notion that we have, that innovation is always in terms of technology. Innovation is always also in terms of experiences. If you think about an app like Uber or maybe Swiggy, in the last 7 years that people have used it, it has not innovated in terms of technology. It has innovated in terms of like how the product feels like, looks like, right? So it's the user experience that is innovative. So innovation comes in very different forms and factors. Innovation also comes in terms of marketing strategies and sales strategies. So always innovate. So that's one way to get the customers to be on the platform. The second reason innovation is very important is it gets you ahead of the competition. The competition is always thinking of, they're also thinking of the ways to get customers, right? But innovation is one way where you can make the existing customers stay. So innovation is very important. And then one thing that people do is, and I've seen this so many times, is when we're talking to businesses, we'll see this architecture slide. where people are talking about their architecture. Uh, Please don't do that, because the moment we do that, then we are giving up our core. Uh, People are understanding what needs to be done. If we have to ever explain an architecture to a person, it should be the fifth or the sixth call where we have this guarantee that there is something fruitful coming out of it, or there's an NDA signed where we know that we are covered behind an NDA to get this data. Because if we do that before that, or if we show our milestones and then tracks before that, then it's just presenting us in a place where the other person knows, right, what is going on. Secondly, a lot of times what happens is when we share our decks, it also gets uploaded in one form or the other, and that's a huge patent block. uh, in terms of patent, the first thing the patent says is that nothing should be in the free market, right? Nothing should be available on the open web. And if your core architecture is on the open web, then there's a problem. So core architecture and all these things are confidential in nature and should be only discussed behind an NDA or after the six or seven calls. Um, and then for this is for more experienced people. We should always bank on experience, right? And we've in some ways covered this also. In my view, there are three generations of startup founders: the ones who are in college, the ones who are in their 20s and 30s, and then the ones who have like 15 or 16 years of experience who jumped into the startup world, working in different fields. So each of them have their own types of experiences and risk, right? So people who have 15, 16 years of experience, they have a good corporate understanding of how things work. They have a good infrastructure understanding of how things work. So that experience is important, right? But at the same time, people who are in their 20s, they maybe they don't have that kind of experience in terms of infrastructure. But what they do have is an experience in terms of adventures with new technology, right? Learning speeds and understanding speeds and quickly building stuff, right? So so each of them have their own strengths, and each of them have their own things that they can learn from their own experiences. So bank on experience, bank on the experience of how things should go. uh, and then one more thing which is very important is, we talk about advisors. I've advised a lot of companies, but when we talk about advisors, if an advisor cannot add input on the first or the second go, it's better to not have that advisor, right? No matter how good their credentials and testimonials look like, right? And this is important because when we are building up a company, we want advisors who are supporting us in some form or the other, right? And that should not always be just telling us what is the next step to do. If we have people who are on the sales side who are getting us business, then it's also important that they are able to provide those businesses. And finally, um, the best way to mitigate a risk is to move on from that mistake. The risk happened, mistakes happened. No need to delve on that. Um, a lot of times we spend a lot of time in slicing and dicing and postmortems of why it happened, and forget that there are other customers who might be still interested. So whether it's just one customer or 10 customers, if a mistake has happened, apologize, make amends, and then move on from that mistake. There's no need to hang over that and then stay in that. So these are some of the strategies we have used personally, and so I just kept these in mind. And the next thing I wanted to talk about very briefly before we get into the Q&A is the investors view. But I just like to ask Vijetha, if before this, do you have any questions from the entrepreneur point of view, or should we just jump into the investor side?
Hey, Ashutosh, thank you so much. And yes, what you have been talking about is founders. I'm also seeing that there are some comments that's coming from various people. They
Okay.
say that if you have an innovation in your business model,
Mhm.
if you have cash flows, and then your risk also is much reduced from the viewpoint of the investor or from the other customers also. When they see a steady business, they
Mhm.
see that you're frugal in the way you're doing things. I think those are some of the good signals that you're sending to your community of customers and investors.
Yes.
Isn't that how it we can take a look at that also, Ashutosh?
Ye- Yeah, but there is always a difference between a signal and uh, um, the actual business, right? So these are all validations, right? I mean, going back to this slide, right? So this a signal is always 80% or 90%, right? So we are getting a positive response, uh, but that validation, that response is converted into a business, is where the risk is mitigated. At this point, I would not say that the risk is mitigated. I would say that at this point, the risk has been listed down, right? The risk is always mitigated when that, it takes some form, it takes an additional form, and then we are at a place where uh, some action has happened on that risk.
Great. And there's also a comment from Venkat. He's asking whether sharing the idea and potential opportunity with investors at an early stage, can you classify that as risk? I really don't know. What could be the answer for that? It really depends.
It depends on the type of investor. If it's an individual investor, I would say it's a higher risk. If it's an institutional investor, most professional institutional investors will say that they have a potential company in this area and then they'd walk away, right? But individual investors, I mean, they're like HNIs and who are into this field, who may be also fishing around, right? So it's a risk. I would classify that as a risk. Hello, hello.
Ah, Ashutosh, I can hear you. Would you like to continue
Okay.
with your investor's viewpoint? Yeah,
Yes, yes. I'll
you can
continue.
continue. Yeah.
So it's a very small deck, right? So I mean, this is I before saying that investors view, I would say it's my view as an investor, right? So I just put that as a like an asterisk here. So when I have to look at a startup, right? So I have my own metrics on which how I de-risk startups, right? And every VC has that. All VCs come up with two models. One is the risk model, and the other is the financial model, of course, to look at how the startup has to evolve. But the risk model is where they'll ask these questions and then they'll see how better these answers are. So just giving an example of these, right? Um, if somebody comes to me and says that they have a product, right? And if I have to assign like a marking or a ranking, and if they talk about it in terms of presentation, that's like only I'd probably give like 20 marks or 30 marks, right? If they talk about a presentation and then they have maybe some like UX UI screens, then probably like 50 marks. But if they give me a demo, then it's closer to like 80 or 90, right? So that's a validation that there is something out there, right? And uh, just to continue on that, right? Because I said 80 only, right? So 80 conversion to 100 happens when that demo has a validation which is external to the company. That there's a third party who has looked at that demo and said that this looks something interesting that they might want to use. So then there is a good validation. So always have a demo, and if you're looking from a investor's point of view, that will help them de-risk your startup. The second thing is, and this I tell to every startup that we look at and we do these mock pitch sessions, is always talk in terms of numbers, right? Um, Not just for the TAM and SOM and other things, right? It's also from the perspective of where you are and where you'd like to be. That means if you want to say, if you have four customers, so say four customers, $2,500 revenue right now, and then in the pipeline, eight customers are in the pipeline with potential this much revenue, right? Because investors are quickly going through their decks, and then just having these benchmarks, just having these points, these numbers are something that is easy to remember. So talk about those numbers and get that. The third part is the product quality risk. We always talk about the 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 product market fit. We don't talk about the product quality fit, which is how the quality of the product degrades over time. And this goes back to our previous slide where we are talking about like customer feedbacks, taking their feedback and doing this, right? So if I am to talk about a startup, and I do my research as an investor, I do my research and I've read through, let's say you have an app and I go through the app store and then I see this all these negative comments and then I see that there are no answers from the person. That's an immediate red flag. That's how I know that the quality of the product is not maintained. The initial product might have like been good, but I don't see that the quality has been. So that's just one part. Or if I am looking at the testimonials and then maybe I look at it for 5 days and I see that the testimonials don't change, it's the first 5 testimonials, right? So it's very hard to say whether the quality of the product has changed. Or when we look at the we talk about what are the timelines of the product, how many versions of the product are there, whether you're on version 1, version 2, version 3. And most of the time people will not maintain versions and they'll say they're on version 1. So then I know that the quality is. So it's a very important thing that investors look at, but you'll not see any investor talk about it because this is like the secret sauce, right? So the, these are the things that come out when investors try to de-risk a startup. They'll look at these things in terms of like how the startups are maintaining quality, and this of course is true for mostly startups which have a customer, but nevertheless a huge risk, right? So they look at that. Then the fourth thing is a team risk. It's more of a general trend where they would like to see how the founders are, the synchrony between the founders and the synergy between the founders. Also, they'd like to see based on the product if that relevant founder has a strong suit. So if it's a tech product, it's it's a technology field, blockchain, AI, ML. If the founder is from that field, right? If it's like more of a e-commerce product, then the sales and marketing, that founder needs to have like a better hold and the grip on the product, right? So it's not just the entire team. A lot of times when I see people talk about combined experience of 150 years, that doesn't matter. If you're building this product, uh, does that founder have that strength, right? And a lot of times you will see that the investors, they talk to that founder, co-founder more, and then they want to see how they manage team and how they're managing the product. So it's very important that the team synergy should always correlate to the type of product that we run. And finally, just related to that is how the short-term versus long-term risks are calculated. The investors will always look at the recruitment strategies and the product roadmap as the ways to do short-term risks. And when they're talking about like the burn rate, the churn rate, right, and how the profit has come, so those come in the long-term risk. So because investors, if they're putting money for like like 1 year, right? So they want to see that in 1 year that profit will come, or in 1 year if we are able to attract like 15 different customers, would be able to scale and then would be able to provide that. So they always look at risk from a short term and a long term perspective. So these are some of the things me as and the group of people that I work with, we look at from a risk perspective. And um, I mean, if there's anything else, I'd like to share this deck with everyone so that they have a little more understanding of how
Yeah,
we are looking at the risk
correct.
perspective. But
Thank you,
as
thank
of
you.
now, I just stand here. I just
Sure,
stop here.
sure. Ashutosh, there is a couple of comments. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So, for example, there is this thing about timing and location risk,
Mhm.
country developing country risk. Okay,
Yes.
so when you start up in a country where policies keep changing, the tax, terrorism, whatever, there are so many talks, right? We know about that, or anything can
Mhm.
happen. Anything can happen, right? I mean,
Yes.
we have gone through some very crazy times in the last 1 year. So, what do you
Yes.
do? Black swan events, etc., right? How do
Mhm.
you? Is there some insurance thing that you should take? What are the things that a founder should look into, Ashutosh?
Yes, the insurance has to be there, right? So and that's why one risk category that we talked about is risk that can be mitigated through insurance. So insurance has to be there, and when we are developing in the developing country, did I go out? Okay, my internet has been crazy today, so for some reason, I thought that I went out. All right,
Ashutosh, you can hear me?
yes, sir. I can hear you.
Yeah. So the question, I'm sorry, I think we were just talking. This about,
Yes.
I was asking about, policy changes that keep happening,
Mhm.
those kind of aspects, tax terrorism, policy changes, country risk. What is your take on that?
It's a twofold take. When we are starting up, I would not worry about a lot of these things because at that point, I mean, the only thing that should matter is how the business is built and how the product is built, and whether we are able to, uh, uh, sorry, folks. Today has been a very interesting day for a very interesting session. I was just telling that today has been a very interesting day for an interesting session. Either I am out or you are getting
Had to come in.
out. Yes.
Not sure what's happening.
Uh, yeah, there's some very interesting background music
I
also
don't know.
coming.
Vijetha, Vijetha, are you there? All good?
Yeah, it is there now. You moved. Okay, there you go. All right. So I'll still answer. I'll start answering the question, and once Vijetha comes in, we'll continue that. As I was saying, I, when a company starts, when a product starts, right, and I would not worry that much about tax changes and whatever other things and policies are there.
Hey,
Right? Hey, there
how are
you
you?
are. Your voice is still breaking.
It's okay, Ashutosh. I think just go ahead. I think there's some bit of a glitch today. We got
Yeah.
we got
Uh,
input.
so for the first, like even if you look at the US or UK or India, right, they all provide like a startup tax bracket. So any company that falls under the startup tax bracket, at least for a year or so, they're covered by it, right? So I would not worry about uh, these policies and the regulations when I'm building the product. Till I am at a place where I have one paying customer or two paying customers, I mean, I'd not worry about that. If we are in a place where we are a startup with some customers a little more late stage, there yes, but there I'm sure at that point we should have like an accountant, we should have like a legal team to handle and manage those kind of risks.
Go there, Ashutosh. It's a bit of a. We're really having a tough time for some
Yeah,
reason.
yeah.
Any other points, Ashutosh? I mean, what do you think? I mean, apart from the things we've discussed today,
No,
any pointers to startup founders? How do you risk mitigate?
I mean, I would say that risk is a very continual thing, right? I mean, at any given point, the risk should not be uh, thought of like that we have become complacent, right? That 90% slide is the one that it's called a startup killer for a reason, right? Because that's the complacencies, slide. We get very complacent that we have covered this, we have covered this, we have covered this, right? But then when you start in a position where all of the things start to go wrong at the same time, and that's a problem, right? So we should never get complacent with our risks. We should always take the risks head on and talk about it in the forum, right? So even if it's about like team risk, so we should talk about it between founders. We should keep that, and then just move on from there.
I think another thing is to get comfortable with risk. The fact
Yes,
that
yes,
you are a startup founder, you have to have risk. There is no life without risk. But I think the art of getting comfortable with risk, that's a tough one.
Correct. Exactly.
And, that's something that I think the network gods are playing up. Yes.
Yeah. So it was very interesting. I had my internet is connected to UPS, but I think the power, when it was going down, the internet at maybe the basement was having challenge, and then that was also causing a problem here.
That's a tough one. The internet, we just, there's always something that happens.
Yeah, it's 2021 and we still have to rely on crappy connections.
Totally. We're the most advanced civilization ever. So fantastic. Yes. I think it's a really good point. I mean, risk is something that I think is a given, right? There's a difference between an entrepreneur and employee. The fact that risk is disproportionate.
Yes.
And so I think there is no real way to, you can of course reduce the risks, I think, with all the things you've said on certain areas that we can deep dive.
Yeah.
But the fact is that, there is no escaping this.
There is no escaping it, right? And then, one thing I didn't talk about is once you get into a bigger position, right? So when you have like 100 employees, 200 employees, the risk increases, right? I mean, then there's like other kinds of risks that also come. Like it's not like a non-formal risks that are also introduced, like inter-employee behaviors, interdepartmental behaviors. It just gets
politics starts kicking in.
Yes.
So I think one thing we should look at, last year, Ashutosh, it gives us a very unique perspective on risk itself. Look at the coronavirus.
Yes.
It is a risk. I mean, and trust me, it's going to be there. 3 years from now, 4 years from now.
Yeah.
We could very much have another similar, if not more deadly pandemic. What do we do there? I mean, these are like the most extreme cases, I would say. Right? I mean, coronavirus is one of the worst kind of risks you will find.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of companies didn't see it coming, and they, that complacency hits you, and then I mean, you could see the difference, right? Immediately, the apparel makers knew that nobody is going to come and buy their apparels, but they immediately got into like mask making and other things, right? I mean, imagine Puma making masks, right?
Everybody.
So, right. So there were some who understood that risk and then evolved, right? But there were some who didn't, and unfortunately, there were some areas, especially the hospitality industry, where there's nothing you can do about it, right? I mean, they tried whatever they could, but people are not leaving house, right? What are you going to do about it, right?
And it's justified, I think. I mean, if you look at the travel industry and hospitality, I understand it's like really tough times, but they've had like a very smooth sailing for the past 300 years, 500 years. Ever since, I think, Ferdinand Magellan got out or Vasco da Gama got out. I mean, this is the first time I think they've kind of got it. And tough. I mean, it changes the business model, I think. It's really tough. Being there at a place when you're traveling, you can't really replace that with VR or AR.
Right. Absolutely.
That's a tough one. I think risk mitigation, this is like really important. Right? I think if somebody understands this well, being an entrepreneur becomes easy. I think that's the toughest part. Handling the uncertainty and risk is the toughest part here. What have you seen? I mean, in terms of startups that you've seen, I mean, what are certain strategies that they've used? For example, any cases that come to mind where you think they've handled that particular risk very well?
I think, last year we saw, I mean, I think last year I had the most meetings I've ever had in my life because, now I had to, talk to startups that I've not been talking to for like months because, in the kind of advisory position I was just talking to them like once every quarter, and then suddenly we were talking about like once every day, once every 2 days, right? And the way we handled risk was to come up with things, and then part of it was throw some things on the wall and make sure something sticks, right? And that was one strategy where we were trying like few things. I know one company which was a blockchain company which got into like selling medical equipment, right? So because they had that e-commerce platform that they built for their blockchain, and they thought that forget about blockchain for now, let's just sell this, right? So they were able to get into that. And then there were other companies like 3D makers. Now, so folks, some of my friends at MIT, they were making these ventilators, and then we got the open source designs, and then we shared it with them, and then they got that, right? So they got into like product making instead of like 3D design hub. So we threw few things at the wall, and then we saw what stuck. Some of them did pivot and then change their business model, but most of them stayed. They came back to where they were, and then they moved on from there.
I think one of the ways is also to look at the best case scenario, worst case scenario,
Yeah.
probable scenario, middle
Yeah.
part. That helps us gauge the risk.
Yeah, and one of the things that I do is, I was talking to one founder today also, right? And they were saying that suddenly they have gotten this new business opportunity which is quite deviant from what they're doing, right? I said, how deviant? And they said, maybe like 20% deviant. I said, just do it, right? I mean,
Nothing. Not
yeah,
even
20,
deviant.
yeah, exactly.
Single
So
line.
you're not pivoting from this model to this model, right? So just do it, right? So you have to see that, right? So you have to gauge like how much you want to move there, right? And I have said this before in this forum also, that I don't mind a pivot. So if I feel that pivoting would reduce my risk, I would suggest somebody to do that, and pivot.
It's a natural, I think, step, right, for people.
Yeah.
They shouldn't look. I think one of the things that entrepreneurs, and maybe me also, and all of us made this earlier, and the big mistake was that if we felt something didn't go the way we wanted, we felt we were wrong, and
Yeah.
we would think twice about changing our view, and I think that's wrong. As we grow older, we realize that we can change views very fast.
Yeah.
In fact, people are like sometimes psyched. They're like, Jagat, you said something yesterday and you changed your mind today. I said, yeah, because I learned something yesterday that I didn't know. So it's
Yeah.
changed. Sometimes it happens. I
Yeah.
think that's like critical, right? When we are able to do that,
Mhm.
it becomes really useful also. Really cool. What else, Ashutosh? I mean, I know I've just come in here just to answer. I'm like the 12th man right now. Filling in
No,
for
no. So, you come right at the right time. I think from my side, I covered what we wanted to do. Vijetha and I, we were talking, so we wanted to keep today's session a little shorter, because risk is a very opinionated subject, right? Everyone has their own opinion on it, right? So I mean, I cannot personally say that these are the ways where you can talk about risk, right? But given the length and breadth of whatever I've done and I've talked about, I thought I'll just put in.
Oh, absolutely. I think very critical, very important topic also. I think most people, if you see why you don't start a business, if you go and ask them, they'll say because it's risky.
Mhm. Right.
Straightforward. Right? I mean, and it's risky when you're ignorant.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not that risky. It's a question of having some knowledge. I think. So very important and great layout.
Mhm.
Super, Ashutosh. I think yes, today, as you said, we will end 5 minutes early. Enjoy this.
Yeah.
Is,
All right.
is Vishnu coming in? He's not there.
Today he's not there, so I think he's traveling. So he's sorry.
No worries. It's a fantastic session again. I think now we have these 10 sessions, like
Yes.
body of work.
Yes.
You have to do something. Make a URL and design stuff. So we have to kind of put that together. That's now right? 10 episodes, so we'll have it as a module, YouTube and all that stuff. Super, sir. Fantastic. I hope the audience has benefited. I learned a lot as usual.
Thank you. I mean, if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. I am in that forum, and I'm in the group also. As I said earlier, I'd like to share this. I'd probably share this in the group also. I mean, it's again a very personal note, but I feel that especially the investor deck and that why start a fail, those two slides are something that is like an eye opener, and then maybe they can help someone.
Great point. I think startups failing when you say that. I mean, that's something that we need to assume. We need to first assume that you're failed, because that's the default state. Then risk becomes okay. It's like average.
So in when we used to do cybersecurity, right? There's a phrase called denial by choice, right? So everything is denied, correct? So when you start a company, you assume that failure is a choice, right? And then you use yeah. So failure is a choice, right? So you start from that point, and you'd always look forward, right? So my mom keeps asking me this, and I keep telling her is that what have I got to lose, right? So that's my first foot forward.
Yeah. Okay? What's the worst that can happen? This is what I tell Akhil sometimes. What's the worst that can happen? Okay, maybe Zoom makes more money than us. Who cares? We're not going to die. So, yes, you see risk like that. Life's simple.
Yeah,
it becomes very easy. Right? It's not that complicated, actually. I think.
So you mitigate your risk, right?
Randy Gage and all these guys say. I think not taking risks is the biggest risk today.
Absolutely. And it's not something that is new, right? I mean, we when startups became a fad, everyone talked about risk and all, right? The entire stock market is based on risks.
Right? And irrationality, I would say. It's not even just risk, it's irrationality.
Right? Now it's memeability, but
off the charts.
Yeah. So.
Super, sir. Thank you so much again, and thanks Vijetha, thanks Ashutosh for again enlightening us with great content. Thanks to the audience for coming in. Hopefully there'll be more of you next time. And until next week.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much.
All right. Thank you, folks, for joining. Thank you again. Please stay in touch. Yeah. Take care.
Bye. Super. Thank you so much. Bye.